Thank you for coming in on a Sunday. I know this is normally a day of rest for a lot of folks. Um, Today, to get started, my name is Uyosa Elegon. I am one of the directors of Shift Press. Shift Press is a movement media organization here in Houston that provides journalism training and news that encourage Houston youth civic engagement. So, in addition to being a publisher, we hold events and trainings like this to make sure that young people have all the tools and resources to be civically involved. And as we understood the recent immigration policies and enforcement have made it very difficult for young people to feel safe. We knew that educators are a crucial touch point for young people across the nation and across our city. So we want to make sure that you all have the tools for this time. With all that being said, is you're very welcome to take your own notes today. However, we will be not only recording this webinar and sharing it out for the public, but also with that publishing some notes on everything that's discussed today. So definitely take notes, but we will also be sharing our own notes for the public and to you via email. Today is going to be a packed schedule of discussion. So I'll, have a very small amount of introductory words to say, but we're going to go through Know Your Rights for folks who are educators or just generally folks who care about keeping undocumented fam folks and families and especially students and staff safe. Then we're going to discuss different types of restorative practices that folks can use within the school environment that really put care as a central activity amidst these really difficult times and beyond. And then lastly, we're going to actually talk a little bit about surveillance and give some tips on what's actually happening across the country. How does this relate to some of the enforcement we're seeing in certain municipalities, and what are some ways that you can stay safe? We will have time to discuss questions in a much more open format at the end of the webinar. However, you are very welcome to submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We're going to be going through these. The panelists will see them. I'll try to field some to the panelists so we kind of get those questions answered as most appropriately as possible and in a timely fashion. With all that being said, um, I want to tell a quick story before we get started. This is an Instagram graphic that was made by Gen Z for Change's El Cambio initiative. And they're basically noting that a lot of officials at the federal level are very frustrated. Recently, Trump's border czar went on CNN and explained that the Chicago mayor's attempt to make sure that folks know their rights in a very grassroots way is making it very difficult for ICE to do what it does, right? So we know that trainings like this and trainings and the information that you'll share with other educators and colleagues at your workplace are really important, and they make a huge difference to making sure that people are safe. So I just wanted to share that. But with that being said, I want to go ahead and let Claudia and Norma take it away with discussing the rights that you have at this time.
Thank you so much, Uyosa, for that introduction and for sharing that story with us. I also saw it recently and I thought it was so powerful. I think people don't realize how necessary it actually is to know our rights and how powerful it is to know our rights, and that it really can, help us and save us to know our rights. So thank you everybody for being here today and being eager and willing to, learn to know your rights, not just for yourselves, but for others. So definitely, take notes, but we will be sending everybody, resources and materials so that you can share with everybody. But my name is Norma Gonzalez. I work with Woody Juntos, and I do a little bit of everything, but I focus a lot on immigrant justice and language justice. And I'm really happy to be joined here today by Dr. Claudia Morales, who is going to be assisting me and, talking specifically about this information when it comes to schools. So I'm gonna go ahead and get us started with some basic constitutional rights. We have these regardless of who is president, regardless of what's going on. Um, the constitutional rights are something that are supposed to be respected, right? And so a lot of these cover a lot of the different things that, might happen when you have an encounter with the police. The First Amendment, being the freedom of speech. We're already seeing this being contested a lot, at least here in Houston, Texas. We had people on the north side who, tried to protest, and there's consequences happening that shouldn't be happening. And so that's something that's covered. We have the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth amendment. These are basically all the ones that protect us from, being randomly searched in public without a warrant, the ones that allow us to be able to, have a court case in order to go through this. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. All right, so in case of an ICE encounter, this applies pretty much in every situation. But just something that I have there in the really big block is you have the right to remain silent and request legal counsel. So, no matter what situation, if you don't know what to do, but you don't want to get in trouble and you don't want to get anybody else in trouble, make sure that you just don't say anything. Okay, that's that simple. Just remain silent. But if you are inside your home or inside a building, you don't have to open the door. And if they are insistent, make sure that you ask for a signed warrant. I do have an example of what a warrant like this would look like, for me to show you all later. Like I mentioned, don't answer any questions from an immigration agent if they try to talk to you. Honestly, even if you do know the answer, just don't interact with them, because they can switch it up on you. They can use it against you. They will try to use anything that they can against you. So it's better just not to give them anything, right? That goes on to not signing anything when speaking first, when without speaking first to a lawyer. So yeah, like I said, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to not sign any documents. And if they do ask you for documents, right? If they do have a warrant, um, don't lie to them about it or show any false documents. Worst comes to worst, those false documents will be used against you if you show them. Don't consent to a search, right? Like I said, without a warrant, really don't collaborate with them. Don't share any information about your status or where you were born or anyone else's. Like I mentioned earlier, I know this seems repetitive, but we really don't want to get yourself or anybody else in trouble. Even if you yourself are a citizen, just stand in solidarity, honestly, and don't let anybody know your status anymore. Take note of as much details as possible, right? During your encounter or after the encounter, just take note of everything that happens, because we want to be able to, have our own information and make sure that, we know what events transcribed. And yeah, ask the agent to if you are free to leave, and if they say yes, leave. Like I said, you don't have to interact with them if they don't have a signed warrant. You don't have to talk to them. You don't have to sign anything. You don't have to let them search you. And if you aren't being detained, then you do not have to stay around them. So definitely, ask them, like, am I detained? Am I free to leave? If they say no, you're not detained, and yes, you're free to leave, then leave. You do not have to stay in that area. And when it comes to children, right, they also have the right not to speak to law enforcement without their parents or their guardian present. Okay, so here is the example of what a search and seizure warrant would look like. Um, what I would say, definitely the most important thing to look out for is the person's name, right? If the name of the person is not the same as the one who who you are or who the person is, then they do not have any right to search your home or your vehicle or whatever it is. And this applies to workplaces as well. Just putting that out there. Like I
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Claudia Morales, and I thank you for being here. I am a former bilingual teacher, so I understand how important this information is, and we're hoping to answer many of your questions today. I am here representing the Houston Federation of Teachers, so my role currently is I focus on professional development for educators. So back to our presentation, it is important to know that the law guarantees all children the right to public education. Um, I know that we're hearing that ICE agents and other law enforcers are trying to discourage students from attending school, but know that it is their right to do so. If you hear that ICE or any other enforcement agencies are coming to your school, please contact MALDEF. MALDEF is an organization that advocates for Latinos and for the rights of students. So make sure you take that information on your screen and let them know if you hear that this is happening on your campuses. Next slide, please. So as a teacher and any educator, really, we need to know that we are not supposed to share any sensitive information with anyone. So names, addresses, especially information like legal status, educators are not supposed to share with anyone without the consent of the parents. If there is a reason to do so, you should know that the parents are okay to share that information. So if you are not sure, I suggest that you talk to your school administrators. They will be able to guide you so that you know what you can share and what you cannot. But in this situation, if ICE comes to your school, make sure that there is a plan in place. Make sure you know who to contact, and you don't have to share that information. That is considered sensitive, and it is against the law to share it, and it is protected under FERPA. Thank you. Next slide, please. So again, make sure that you, as if you are an educator, if you are a parent or anyone that comes to the school, often make sure that you understand what the policies are. And if there isn't a policies or a procedure on your campus, make sure that you talk to your administrator and ask, can we create a plan? It is better for everyone to know what to do if ICE comes to their door, instead of having that happen and the teacher there or the educator in the classroom not know. And as a parent, it is extremely important that you know what those policies and procedures are. Make sure that everybody knows, even if it is a substitute teacher coming to that school, make sure they are also aware of what the policies and procedures are. If you are a teacher, make sure that those instructions are included in your substitute folder. If you are a parent, just ask one of the administrators what is the policy if the teacher is not there on that day. So this is very important so that everybody knows what to do and they can act in unison to protect all students. And with that, I pass it back to you, Norma. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am going to share a spreadsheet right now where you all can find trusted legal attorneys in Texas, in case you all need to reach out to them or just want to have, their contact information. It also has contact information for notaries who are willing to, you know, help, but this spreadsheet has a bunch of different categories, with know your rights information. So it's really just another good resource to have. But we can go back to the presentation. Like Claudia mentioned, um, it is possible, to enforce the policies that schools might have to protect the privacy and safety of our students. So I do have some examples here of what that would look like. And then we also have a document that includes these. Um, I believe Dr. Claudia Morales has the link to that if she could share it in a couple of moments, so
Sure.
that you can see it. But yeah, basically it has a bunch of, different resolutions on how to move forward in uh, creating a policy that protects students regardless of immigration status and their privacies. Since right now it can, look different for a lot of different school districts. So make sure that, like Claudia said, if you aren't really aware of what the plan is at your school right now or how they would handle it, talk to an administrator, and see how it is right now. If things are not as protective of students as you think they should be. Take a look at the examples that we have of the resolutions themselves, and then, yeah, you can take it to the school board. If you go on to the next page of the slideshow, I also have an example of what a district policy would actually look like. Um, so yeah, I encourage you all to, advocate for your students, support them in every way that you can, and you're already taking the first step by being in this call, right? So, thank you again. We can go on to the next slide. So, I encourage educators to maybe talk about or have preparedness guides available for their students. Um, I can share this. This will be in the email. I don't have the link to it right now, but what a preparedness guide basically entails is um, several worksheets for students to fill out with their families, in which they will um, write down important information such as, basic things like contact information, their date of birth, but also things like if they have any medical needs, any medication that they need to take. Um, they will also go over, who would be taking care of the kids in case anything were to happen, for how long, just kind of questions and things that we don't really want to think about, but we should think about just so that, we're ready as possible, as much as we possibly can be, in case of these horrible situations where families are kind of just left without knowing what to do, but we can try to help out as much as we can. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so like I've been mentioning, it's important that, we support our students and we, provide them with trauma-informed care, support, and resources, because a lot of, educators might not be in similar positions as their students. They might not be undocumented. They might not be from mixed status families. They might not be able to understand some of the fear and also shame that we might be feeling right now. So, Make sure that whenever you're approaching them, that you are trauma informed. And in one of the links that I already shared and will be shared via email, I do have a lot of different links to different therapists that talk to people who are dealing with the trauma of this. And so I definitely encourage you all to continue to read up on this and continue to get informed so that you're able to help out your students whenever you can. Can I get the next slide? Yeah, one of the things that you know is essential and part of the preparedness guide or documents that people should prepare is their important documents, right? Creating a plan for the children, for the vehicle, for finances, talking to everybody responsible, like I said, just making a plan. And once you have this plan completed, it can also be very important to make sure that you make it kind of like official in the name of the law. Sorry about my puppy. But in order to do this, this plan would end up being called the power of attorney. And I also do include templates of this in the link that I shared. And with the power of attorney, that's also basically the plan guide. And that's where you will be writing the information about your children, your vehicle, your finances, who's taking care of what, for how long, where they can get medication, all of that stuff. And once you complete that power of attorney, you should get it notarized. That's how you make it like legit, right? And so you can get it notarized by any notary. But like I mentioned, we also do have notaries that are willing to do it for free, at least in the Houston area. So I encourage you to look into that. And then once you have these things kind of prepared, um, you know if you're able to reach out to an attorney or a legal nonprofit to kind of get a legal consult and see what your options are, right? We want to be able to know whether depending on your status, we're able to get you some sort of protections. And if we're not able to get you protections, what precautions can we take, or extra steps to prepare can we take, in these circumstances? And lastly, now that you're prepared, you can get more know your rights cards and distribute them, right? So that more people can get protected. But we can go on to the next slide. Here's just a list of the documents that are essential for students to have. So, like their school records, their medical records, their health insurance cards, pretty much anything that a child would need, right? Um, and this is all going to be part of what's emailed to y'all. So, don't worry if you don't catch it all. We can move on to the next slide. We have been using this acronym SALUTE in order to let people know what they should do once they see ICE. It basically stands for several different things that we should take note of to ensure more accurate reporting so that the community can be more informed and less alarmed, and that uh, if we see it a couple of days later, people don't think that it's happening now. So the S, it stands for what is the size, what is the strength of the detention force? Is it ICE? Is it the police? How many officers are there? How many cars are there? What are the actions or activities that they're doing? Are they harassing people? Are they making unconstitutional arrests? Is there a mass raid? What's the location? Where is it happening? What's the address? What type of building is it? Is it a store, a school, a gas station? what's their uniform, what are they wearing, are they wearing blue uniforms, green uniforms. Like I mentioned, it's important to note the time and the date that this is taking place, and also observe their equipment. What are they ready for, right? Do they have helmets, batons, shields, or vests? Um, but yeah, once you have this information, you can, share it to your communities. If you have a neighborhood group or a sharing system in Houston, we do have a rapid response team that you can report it to, and that will also be a part of the email in case y'all need that resource. And then in the next slide, I kind of just I have the link. Yay! I have the link to a preparedness packet. This one is in Spanish, but in the email that I send, I can send it in English as well. Um, but yeah, like I mentioned, it's basically uh, a bunch of like worksheets and just questions for people to fill out that will help them figure out their plan, like you know uh do you have somebody that is in charge of anything, that's going to remember all of the dates, all of the places. Some people, they have their A number, who is going to be remembering that. So it's just includes all of that information. And actually, speaking of A number, can I get the next slide? I'm almost done, y'all, I promise. But this is important, right? As much as we prepare and as much as we know our rights, sometimes it is going to happen. We have seen it happen already since literally the second day of the administration change. So it is important that, if one of our loved ones is detained, we are able to find them. We are able to, speak with them. We are able to, make sure that they have an attorney and that we're building their case and that we have, their power of attorney and that everything is being taken care of. And so, like I mentioned, the A number, their A number is going to be very important. That's how you'll be able to find them in in a detainment location. If you don't have their A number, you're going to need more, of their basic information to find them, but it will be a little bit more difficult. So part of those preparedness packets, they do talk about how it's important that everybody, including children, know their A number. But I also do have, several links that are going to be helpful in case of locating somebody who is detained. The ICE detainee locator, all of the different detention centers. There's also the National Immigration Legal Services Hotline in case you, need help finding somebody after detainment. They can try to assist you with that. And then I also added the legal directory. This one is, nationwide. So you just put in your location and it will pull up a bunch of different nonprofits and legal services providers that can help you after detainment. And then my last slide is a little bit of the work that I do with Woody Juntos. So if you have, done all of these steps, you did your preparedness packet, you did your consults, and you realize that, hey, you are eligible to actually become a citizen. But let's say you don't know the 100 questions to become a citizen for the citizenship test. You don't have the money to pay for the fee because you are low income. You need help with the mock interview. You just want to practice with somebody. We're able to assist you. Just hit me up. And whatever stage you're at, if you don't know English, I'll help you learn to. That's it. But yeah, I'm sure my information is going to be in the email as well. But y'all are welcome to contact me in case you, have any further questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Norma and Claudia. This information for sure was quite a bit for folks. For folks, this is your first time hearing any of this, so we will be sharing this information via email, and also will be public on our site sometime tomorrow. So just give us a second to put it all together for you. With all that being said, we're gonna move over to Erica, who's gonna share a little bit about Restorative Houston, but also um, give us some restorative practices for the moment that we should engage. So, Erica, I'll give it to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm very glad that everyone was able to join us today, and really grateful to Norma Gonzalez and Dr. Morales for sharing some very practical, useful information that, just as I was watching those slides go by and listening to them share all of these resources, I was thinking about all of the weight that so many people are carrying, trying to figure that out. And so thank you very much for all of those resources. Um, those all of that information that was just shared about knowing your rights, my mind keeps going back to the slide that Uyosa shared in the introduction that said that communities are making it hard for ICE to operate. And I'm coming to you from a space of really focusing on building community and maximizing the connection and supportive power of community, which is what Restorative Houston does. I'm here today as a representative of Restorative Houston, which is a nonprofit organization that began in 2013 in Houston, and we got 501c3 status in 2024. And you can find information at restorativehouston.org and on all of those social media platforms that you see listed up top. But if ever there was a time to leverage the power of community, this is it. This is one of those times. And Restorative Houston offers lots of opportunities for people to get together and sit in community and build connections and learn skills that allow us to better support one another. If I could get the next slide. Just a quick about myself. I'm a teacher. I teach high school English, and I teach restorative practices to adult and youth facilitators. And I am here because all of these worries are showing up in school on a daily basis. Our students are carrying this, whether because they are undocumented or they're coming from a mixed status family or someone close to them. They're worried about the state of the world. They are worried about themselves. They are worried about how our communities are functioning. And they're worried about the future and what it looks like for them. And so I have found it very useful to anchor in purpose, which is why I'm sharing mine with you. My purpose is to live and teach joyfully, restoratively, and sustainably. And I find that the wilder the world gets, the easier it is to manage if we keep our purpose in mind. You know, what are we trying to do? And some values that I'm centering today are community. Again, we are so much stronger together than we are alone. The need for ongoing reflection about our practices as educators, the need and benefits of collaboration and working together, critical thinking, making sure that we're responding to what's actually happening. We're being thoughtful about how we're engaging in our practice as educators. And finally, from gratitude, to be part of a community where people are coming together to talk about issues that are impacting our students. To my personal gratitude to have the privilege that I have and the power that comes with it, to support other people and to serve as an anchor when people are feeling adrift. So that's my purpose in coming to you today. Next slide. So just quickly, restorative justice for people not familiar with the term, and there are a bunch of definitions out there. This is mine. Restorative justice is healing harm through practices that build community, that foster accountability, and that honor the humanity and dignity of all parties. So there are, if we could click forward, there are practices. Justice is the goal, and practices are the means to the goal. And when we're thinking about harm, we need to think of several, like 4 major types of harm. The first one is emotional and spiritual harm. Your feelings are hurt. You are damaged in the soul in some way. Material and physical harm, you know, there are different types of hurt, and it's interesting to me to think about how emotional and spiritual harm can become physical harm. I have a lot of students right now, and I'm sure many of you do too, who are hurt in the spirit and they're having a hard time sleeping. Their stress levels are through the roof. They are pulled in emotional and spiritual ways that are impacting their physical health. There's the material harm of losing jobs and losing residences, the community and relational harm, when you are living in a world that is telling you that you are not valuable or important. Students, I'm also seeing a lot of students deal with this the way that a lot of people deal with things, through humor that is not necessarily super funny, but making jokes that are really harmful and damaging to relationships. And then there's the structural and historical kind of harm, what historical context we are in, and the context that led to this one, and the structures that have been built. So when we think about those different types of harm, there are restorative practices to help heal some of those harms. One is normed conversations. And what we mean by normed conversations is there are structures in place so that everyone gets an opportunity to be heard if that is what they choose to do. And there are agreements about how people are going to listen to one another, speak to one another, and how they're going to treat information that they get from someone else. So normed conversations can take the form of circles. That's a restorative practice that a lot of people are familiar with. Community building circles, circles around a particular topic. Restorative conferences, where people who have harm between them directly come together, and check-ins. Culturally relevant curricula is a restorative practice. As Claudia was saying, or as Norma was saying, trauma-sensitive pedagogy is very important. Equitable discipline codes, holistic grading, and the list goes on and on and on. There isn't just one short list of restorative practices. If we're intentional about it and our mindsets and our behaviors are aligned toward identifying and understanding harm, and we establish particular practices to heal that harm, then that practice is restorative. So next slide. So I'm a teacher, so I asked my students, the task that I had today was to talk about how we can support students and colleagues as we're going through all of these changes. And one thing that keeps coming up in conversations with students is that they feel voiceless. And so I thought it best, if I was going to come here and be their voice, to ask them what they would say. And the first thing that they said is just, here's what we want. We want to be protected. We want to be heard. We want to be valued for who we are and our lived experience. And we want to be educated. We are at school and we want to learn here. And there's a very powerful recognition among students that a lot of the things that they need to be educated on are painful. And a lot of the things that we are teaching them, in my English class, We talk about empathy. We talk about understanding characters. We talk about building arguments that make sense. We talk about the importance of critical thinking and questioning our sources. And that's what they want. They're very, knowledge is power. That's one of the themes of this conversation today. And the knowledge that they learn in school is the power to make the decisions for themselves, to create and take advantage of opportunities. Students also want us to have an awareness that we are always teaching, that switch is never flipped off, that they are watching us, that we are role models. And from us, they are learning what humanity looks like. They're learning what empathy looks like. They are learning what respect looks like. They also are looking at us to see how we are managing conflict around this and how we are managing stress. And they're taking cues from our practices. They are learning from us what emotional intelligence and self-regulation looks like and does not look like. They are learning from us what it means to do purpose-driven work, to be focused relentlessly on education as a higher calling. They're learning critical thinking from us. They're learning about setting boundaries. They're learning about fairness, what collaboration looks like. They're learning about professionalism, and they are watching us to see how we reflect on the state of the world, on our own place in it, on the dynamics between us and our students, and on our daily practices to see if we're thinking about what we're doing and how it compares with what our oath is, what our charter is, and what our purpose in life is. Next slide, please. So they generated a handy dandy do and don't list. They want us to center quality education. That is the focus. That is the basis of our relationships. That is why we are at school with students, to make sure that they get the education that they deserve. They don't want us to forget our shared purpose and go off into some other land where the quality of their education is no longer the highest priority. They want us to affirm our commitments to them and to each other. I'm committed to hearing you. I am committed to seeing you as a person in your fullness. They don't want us to make promises that we can't keep. They want us to provide space, open up opportunities for them to speak if they want to, and they don't want us to pry. If you are seeing a student that appears that they are in need of comfort, provide the comfort and ask fewer questions. Let them volunteer what they want to volunteer, but it's not our business to pry. It's our business to protect. They want us to acknowledge what's going on without minimizing it, without saying that it doesn't matter or that they shouldn't worry or that, they don't want us to hypothesize best case scenarios. They want us to acknowledge what is actually going on. And they don't want us to feed into fear. If we are frantic and we are kind of losing our minds over it, that encourages them to do the same. And my students, as I'm sure all of yours, have plenty of access to very scary information. And a lot of it is not correct. They're getting a lot of their information from social media. I really appreciated what Norma was saying about the SALUTE acronym. Let's make sure that we're operating in facts, which goes to the next do. They want us to encourage critical thinking. They want it to be anchored in reasoning things through. They are well aware that people don't make their best decisions when they're operating from a place of fear. They don't want us to avoid questioning ourselves, particularly thinking about our own roles, how things impact us, and they don't want us to avoid questioning sources. They want us to notice how people are doing, but they don't want us to assume we know how people are doing. They want us to maximize learning with joy, come into the classroom excited, come in with, very anchored in the power of our content. I mean, most of us chose to teach because it's a passion, it's a calling. You're here on a Sunday because this is something that's really important to you. And they want to feel that excitement about learning when they're at school. They don't want us to let learning go flat. They want us to build and nurture community without forcing relationships or stepping into spaces where we're trying to look supportive if that's not how we've always been. There's obviously a lot of mistrust in the air right now, justifiably so. Students want to make sure that their relationships with us are authentic and that we are actually trustworthy. And they really want us to focus on others' humanity while not forgetting that we are human too. This is a burden to all of us to some extent, right? We need to keep ourselves in perspective. And we also need to do the self-care that's necessary to make sure that we are showing up at school and with our students, present and fully present and able to do the best of the things that we can do. Really, what students said they wanted was for us to show up the way that we should be showing up every day. They deserve the best from us all the time. And we need to keep in perspective as adults that although we're feeling all the things that we're feeling, most of us are not affected to the same degree as some of our students are. And we need to show up the best way that we can and be intentional and thoughtful about how we're engaging in conversations and relationships with students, and to anchor ourselves in the fundamental reality that we are all here because knowledge is power, education is liberation. And that is what my students had to say about how we can support them. And it turns out that that's really the best way that I can think of for us to support each other too. Focus on our communities, connect with one another, really see each other and see ourselves and how we are participating in community. So I thank you for your time, and that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Erica. I appreciate everything that you have given to us. This is definitely resonating with a lot of different folks. Um, we are going to, I see your questions, and they're really good questions. We're going to go ahead and keep going on with time because we're making very good on time. So we'll have plenty of time for discussions. I'm going to go ahead and give it over to Clarence from the No Tech Criminalization and Education, Notice Coalition, and allow Clarence to go ahead and share his screen.
Hey everybody, just working through some tech logistics real quick. Boom, we are good to go. Let me share this, go on the slideshow. Perfect. So again, thanks for having me this afternoon. My name is Clarence Oko, you see him pronouns. I'm with the Notice Coalition, so that's No Tech Criminalization and Education. I'll talk a little bit more about what Notice is, but essentially we're a national network of researchers, advocates, and others that are pushing back against the dramatic expansion of police surveillance in schools around the country. I'm also a senior attorney with the Georgetown Center on Privacy and Technology. My expertise is around the relationship between race, technology, and the law. So particularly looking at the way in which new technologies are showing up in Black and Brown communities to really resuscitate histories of racial inequality and injustice. So in today's presentation, I want to focus a little bit on the work that the coalition has been doing in the broader field around youth surveillance in schools. And what does that mean for immigrant youth and their families, particularly in light of the context that we now find ourselves in with the new administration. So let me begin by just reiterating that schools today are a site of surveillance, that Unfortunately, we have seen these dramatic investments, which we'll talk a little bit more about in detail in a second, but we've seen dramatic investments in a variety of controversial technologies that are showing up in schools around the country. What's important to know now is that these technologies grant law enforcement the ability to expand police presence in schools and out of schools in ways that are historically unprecedented. Law enforcement officials now have more access to information about students, whether that's in school, online, their academic performance, so on and so forth. More information about students than ever before because of the technologies that are now available to them. And that we've seen this trend not happen in isolated fashion, but in school districts around the country, to such an extent that we have kind of developed this concept called digital pushout. Folks who are familiar with terms like the school to prison pipeline or school pushout will find it somewhat familiar, but essentially, it's how the school to prison pipeline and the school to deportation pipeline are being reimagined in the digital era, how these technologies really come together to allow for, law enforcement to take advantage of these technologies to create more connective tissue between policing apparatus within our communities and youth serving systems, including schools. Just to kind of give you a visualization of what this looks like, you can kind of see this artistic rendering that we did, but that tries to capture some of this, that now schools are just kind of one site and a network of agencies and other systems that are connected to and engage in data sharing, oftentimes with various law enforcement agencies. So how do we get here? So particularly in the last decade, we have seen a really rapid transformation in terms of surveillance within schools, particularly as high-profile school shooting tragedies have taken place, from Parkland to Uvalde, and so many others in between. Unfortunately, youth surveillance and other forms of policing have become the kind of the preferred response from school districts. That trend was met by the COVID-19 pandemic and the increased federal and state investments that we saw in particular surveillance technologies. Things like the CARES Act, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, created multi-million and multi-billion-dollar funding streams that allow for school districts to be able to procure a growing range of technologies. And then we also saw, of course, as folks have probably been very tuned into, we've seen a heightened rate of private sector investment in artificial intelligence and other types of technologies. A lot of times folks think about that exclusively as like ChatGPT and generative AI, but there are a variety of other technologies, particularly these surveillance technologies, that also rely on similar technological kind of underpinnings. So they are also forms of artificial intelligence, and these are the systems that are being deployed against our communities. So what kind of technologies are we seeing in schools? It ranges. So from schools themselves, we see things like student device monitoring, facial recognition, and social media surveillance, especially with the educators on the call. Some of these companies will probably sound familiar to you. Student device monitoring in particular is very prevalent, according to the Center on Democracy and Technology. Over about 80 to 90% of school districts have some type of student device monitoring. These are essentially technologies that allow for school officials to be able to monitor what young people are doing on school issued devices. The kind of pervasive nature of that particular technology depends oftentimes on the vendor and the school district in terms of what permissions they offer to these companies, but essentially everything from what websites kids are visiting all the way to messages that they're having. If you're messaging somebody on social media, so on and so forth, those things can all be made visible to the school district. And as we'll talk about in a little bit in a second, student device monitoring doesn't only happen when kids are in schools, but it also happens when they go home as well. And in a number of school districts, during off hours, the folks who receive alerts for any type of problematic behavior from students on these devices. The people who receive that are oftentimes law enforcement agencies. We'll talk about that more in a second. But folks are probably also familiar with things like facial recognition. Again, this is a technology that relies on artificial intelligence, computer vision in particular, to be able to ostensibly identify individuals. We're seeing an increasing number of school districts use facial recognition to moderate access to the school. So now folks have to, either show ID or some other kind of thing, have to put their face in front of a camera to verify their identification. And this has, of course, really profound implications for kids from mixed status families. For all the obvious reasons. And then social media surveillance as well, we have already, which you all probably already aware of, but again, this just allows for school districts to be able to monitor kids and what they're saying on their social media profiles. The technology, similar to student device monitoring, generates automated alerts to school officials and or law enforcement about any type of behavior that's being flagged. Initially, those technologies were designed to kind of identify kids who were either threatening to harm someone else or threatening to harm themselves. But school districts have a lot of latitude in terms of what type of behavior that they want to monitor or identify as particularly problematic. But in addition to those technologies that we see from schools, there are also a lot of technologies coming from law enforcement agencies who will bring those technologies from their kind of context into schools. So this is things like student data sharing between schools and various law enforcement agencies, and those law enforcement agencies then sharing it out with federal law enforcement agencies through either real-time crime centers or fusion centers. Those are basically just intelligence hubs where all the different sources of intelligence about whoever they're looking for in a community can be kind of coalesced and organized in a way where law enforcement can then take actions based off that intelligence. We also see things like automated license plate readers, which allow for the cops to trace where your vehicle is throughout its movements in a city or a geographic area. Police network cameras in schools, which is a particularly alarming concern. There are a number of school districts now that give access to the cops to their camera systems within their school district. So cops can just turn on their cameras and see who is and who isn't in schools. And some of those camera systems can actually be equipped. And we have seen some of them be equipped with facial recognition so that they're able to identify who is and who isn't in the school district. So, you might think that these technologies are dystopian and far off in the future, and they are dystopian, but they are not far off in the future. In fact, they are increasingly prevalent throughout school districts. I'll draw your attention to a couple of these. This comes from a very recent survey, I think from either last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, from the Center on Democracy and Technology. I'll highlight a couple of things. So, for example, with facial recognition, about 31% of educators said that their schools were using facial recognition to identify who is entering and exiting school buildings. 35% of teachers reported that their schools are sharing data with law enforcement agencies, including immigration authorities. We also see for example, 22%, so over 1 in 5 schools saying that they're using drones to monitor their school grounds. And disturbingly, we see about 20% of schools using predictive policing. So the idea of being able to use predictive analytics to identify kids who are likely to commit future crimes, not folks who've actually done the crime in reality. So drawing your attention a little bit more on the student activity monitoring and who has access to that. So as I mentioned before, when students are using their devices at home, those student monitoring technologies are still in place. You would imagine that the alerts from those systems would go to the schools, but in at least 42% of 42% of educators said that their schools are monitoring kids outside of school, and that of that group, that there are at least, so 23% of educators said that someone in public safety, so that's law enforcement, immigration enforcement, will receive those alerts. So that just kind of lets you know, again, the types of threats that we're seeing from surveillance and this nexus between school surveillance and both traditional forms of policing, but also immigration enforcement as well. So now that we kind of just laid the foundation for what school surveillance is and what does it mean and its implications for immigrant students and their families, I want to just kind of do a little bit of myth busting because whenever we have conversations around surveillance technologies, our minds just kind of can go all over the place. And I think it's really important that we identify what is actually happening and what are those real acute threats to our families and our communities. So that we can kind of keep our attention on what are the real and immediate threats rather than things that could potentially happen. So the first one is, and I hear this a lot, my phone's listening to everything that I say. That's not necessarily true. And that's actually a distraction from what I think is the most important thing, which is that school issue devices and devices that use school Wi-Fi are being actively monitored by schools, by ed tech companies, and and that data is oftentimes shared with law enforcement agencies. They have the ability to monitor your email, your text, social media use, even keystrokes and keywords and phrases that you're using. So if you are either using a school issue device, or even if you are like at school using your personal device and is connected to the school's Wi-Fi, that will give them the ability to, again, monitor all of those different sensitive communications. So that's why it's really important to try and maximize your privacy, taking as many steps as you can to mitigate the exposure of sensitive information and data, trying to think about like how you're communicating with folks, why you're communicating, what information. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but really important. It's not so much important that the phone is listening to everything. What's really important is who actually has information, who has access to the information that you're communicating through your devices. So another myth that we hear is, well, they already have my data anyway. Like, why should I care about any of this? One of the key things to remember is that we are constantly producing new sensitive data. And for those folks who are working with immigrant families and immigrant young folks, it's really important to understand that those communications that you're having need to be as protected as possible, that you shouldn't be sharing information that isn't absolutely necessary to share. And you should be trying to identify the most secure ways of being able to share really sensitive information, because it's not just about the data that's already out there, it's about the data that's being created in real time. And there are things that we can do to protect our data, the data that we're creating even right now. Couple more myths. So schools only use AI for ChatGPT, exam proctoring, and other forms of student learning. As we've already talked about, surveillance AI is embedded in a variety of surveillance technologies that are showing up in schools around the country, and that these technologies are being used to surveil, censor, and punish students and their families, especially Black and Brown communities and immigrant communities. And then most importantly, and I think this is going to bring us into the final portion of this, is around law enforcement, and that law enforcement can legally access student information, student data without a court order. That is not true. There are federal laws that protect, federal and state laws that protect student data. And in particular, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which most folks know as FERPA, makes it unlawful for any third party, including ICE, to access student educational records without a judicial order or court issued subpoena. It's really important that it's actually a judicial order, because a lot of times ICE will use other forms of basically things that carry the same legal weight as a judicial order. So just making sure that the schools actually receive that before they provide any access to any confidential educational records. We'll talk a little bit more about FERPA and the Fourth Amendment. So not only does FERPA protect student privacy, but it also gives families certain rights. And amongst those rights are the rights for families to inspect, correct, and amend student records. Schools are obligated under FERPA to keep a catalog of every person that is not a school official or a family member, keep a catalog of anybody who requests or has access to or is given access to student data. So this is really important if you have concerns around like who is looking at your students' records or files, you have that right. I believe in Houston, you can submit a kind of letter to your school principal at the very least, but every school might be a little different, but there are different officials designated in your school to receive your FERPA request. So please avail yourself of those rights if you have concerns around who's accessing your students' records. One other quick thing about FERPA that I'll just throw in, and it makes it a little bit tricky. FERPA gives rights to parents over their students' data. It does not necessarily, for most students, it does not give the student the right to protect, or the student the right to inspect, correct, and amend their records unless they're 18 years old. So that's just a really important wrinkle and nuance that I wanted to share, because I hear a lot of times from students like, oh, can I request this information? That is not the case more often than not. More often than not, that has to come from the parent or a legal guardian. And then as one of the previous presentations earlier discussed, there's a Fourth Amendment as well, which prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures from law enforcement or from state officials. Period. So it's not just cops; it's also school officials as well. In the schooling context, the Fourth Amendment is a little more nuanced. Students in schools, unfortunately, have fewer privacy protections than they would if they were outside of school. And so, in the schooling context, the school official has to have a reasonable suspicion that the student has violated either a law or a school rule before they can search any of their belongings. And this includes cell phone devices. Now, here's what's really important. They have to actually have reasonable suspicion of a particular school violation or a legal violation. They have to have it at the time that they are conducting that search, and it has to be kind of cabined to like what they're looking for. So, for example, if I think that you were bringing some type of like unlawful contraband into school, I have no reason then to go searching through your phone, right? Versus like if I think that you were engaged in cyberbullying and I saw you, texting somebody, in that case, courts will probably say that they have reasonable suspicion. But the key here is that more often than not, schools should never be looking at a student's device unless they have a reasonable suspicion that the student was using that device to break a school rule or to break a law, and they need to have, again, a reason why they're searching that phone. That phone needs to be able to produce some type of evidence that would suggest that that student is breaking the rule of the law. So finally, some tips about what folks can do. One of the things that you hear about in the privacy context a lot is this idea that privacy is individual, and I want to push back against that privacy is about community practice of care and resistance. So there are a lot of like really helpful tips that folks can embrace. I would direct you to the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They have the Surveillance Self-Defense toolkit, and I would definitely encourage folks to take a look there. More advice and tips than I can give you all in the course of this quick presentation, but just a couple like highlights to really make sure that you're aware of. One, again, because this is a community practice, it's not just enough that you're protecting yourself in terms of how you're engaging in privacy, but that you are also encouraging these good habits with your friends, your family, and your coworkers. You have as much privacy as the least protected person in your life. And that's also true for like immigrant young folks. They are only as protected as we, the folks around them, are engaging in good habits. That these good habits go a long way. But however, there's nothing perfect that you can do. So do the best that you can to minimize harm. It's not about trying to check off every single box on the list. It's about doing what you can to make sure that you're minimizing risk, both to yourself and to your community. Always make sure that you're assessing the risk and how you choose to engage with folks. So again, as I mentioned before, if you're engaging in some type of sensitive communication, think about alternative ways, right? As opposed to like, let me text you this very sensitive question or whatever. Like let's have an in-person conversation, right? There are like, again, it doesn't necessarily require high-tech solutions. Like sometimes it's just using that good common sense. And again, I would direct folks to this resource. Finally, like one thing that you can do today that I would encourage is like downloading the Signal app if you don't already have it. Signal is a wonderful messaging app. It is managed by a company that is really committed to doing privacy work. They have what we call end-to-end encryption. So if you're texting someone else using Signal, those messages cannot be in the way in which they're being communicated can't be intercepted. Now, granted, somebody takes a screenshot or whatever what you're texting, right? They can still be shared, so it's not 100% like secure, like nothing is, but it's a much more safe way of communicating with folks. And if you already have Signal, one thing that you can do today is actually reach out to folks, friend or family member, and encourage them to download it as well. And with that, again, here's some more information about the Notice Coalition and about myself. Those things will be made available after the presentation. Thanks, and I will turn it back over.
Thank you so much, Clarence. We have gotten through so much information in an hour and about 11 minutes. So I want to go through some questions. This is a time for questions. Uh, I am going to go in order of what we have. So if you're wanting to submit a question, the best way we can go through them will be in the Q&A function. The first question we had was someone asking about, and I'll have this for Dr. Morales. Um, what do you recommend for faculty at universities? We are getting mixed info about what is considered private versus public spaces.
Sure. I have a couple of suggestions. So first, make sure that you ask for instructions and a plan in writing. Just like I said earlier, for elementary schools, everyone should know what to do. It should be the same in higher ed institutions. So if there is no plan, I suggest that you talk to the dean so there's a meeting so that everyone can participate and one can be created. The other suggestion is make sure that you are familiar with FERPA and how it applies in higher ed settings. I know that higher ed institutions do have trainings for faculty and staff so that they understand what is allowed and what information can be shared and what cannot be shared. So make sure that if you don't know where those sessions are, mostly they do have them in virtual mostly, but I know that there may be some in person. So that is extremely important. And the other thing is make sure that you can share some resources with students. Remember that they may be experience a lot of anxiety. So if you have resources to share with them, things like this webinar, things on know their rights, that would be very helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Um, I want to add, and this is actually going to be looped in with the next question. So to the person who asked that question, I think the way I answer this next question will be helpful as well. Um, so the next question is how can we support students when they get to a point that when they want to use their freedom of speech and assembly? I think the best way I can always engage with folks via my working shift press is to tell a story. So I'm going to do that really quickly. Right now, there's a lot of commotion, reasonable commotion around the district's reaction to Northside High School, HISD's reaction to Northside High School students wanting to use their voices to reject the type of environment that um, that ICE is trying to force into the district, and to ask that the district protect students. So essentially, and I'll drop this link in the chat. Northside High School students decided to speak out against the ICE raids that are taking place in Houston and the HISD takeover. For folks who aren't familiar, the state has taken over one of the largest districts in the state. And because of that, there have been just a lack of democratic representation or democratic practices at the district. But they decided to speak out and they wanted to protest. And in reaction to that protest, in response to that protest, the superintendent that was placed by the state and some leadership at the central office of HISD decided to tell the parents and guardians of these protesters that their children will be suspended or expelled for doing so. So there right now there's a letter that's there's this petition that's going around that there is being circulated asking for folks um, to express support for those students and those parents and everyone that's being affected. The ACLU of Texas sent a chapter to HISD leaders urging them to immediately rescind those punishments who are given for the students who are given suspension. So please do engage on that. With all that being said, is the way you can support these students when they do decide is to make sure that they are actually supported. It's not new to protests on a school campus. It's not new to do a walkout. Yes, some are supervised by the school and some are not, but you have to also realize there are some things that take precedent whenever folks are unsafe, right? So you can't learn unless you're safe, and those students wanted that to be very clear. Another thing is that Caney Creek students we actually protested very recently. They had a walkout at their school district. Caney Creek High School is in Conroe ISD. A student journalist, Eric Garcia, recently wrote an opinion piece about the walkout, and also produced this amazing photography as well. So please do also check out Shift Press. We're constantly always uplifting these stories from a student perspective and also paying students to do so. Um, but I want to also give do other panelists have any thoughts about when students want to protest, what are the ways that we can support them? If not, we can go to the next question. Go ahead, Erica.
I think one way is to show up with them. Um, there's a lot of performative allyship. And it's one thing to say I support you, it's another thing to actually put yourself at risk. And I realize that's a big ask for people who might also be at risk, but stand with them. And another thing that I would say is that my students and I have had several conversations about what protest is, and there's more than one way to use your voice. I have students who are organizing spaces for families and other students to just get together and talk and find support from each other. And I think that's another thing that we can do is, this is an opportunity for us to be sounding boards also, and yeah, provide our experience and our support in real time.
One other quick thing I'll add is, depending on the nature of the protest, it may be helpful to have and coordinate legal observers. So there are groups like the National Lawyers Guild, folks like Law for Black Lives, and others that have like networks of attorneys that are able to support. So especially in instances where students are thinking about things like civil disobedience, just given the kind of environment that we're in now, just having those trained legal observers and having like other attorneys on standby, both to like be able to support with whatever activity that they're doing, but also on the front end, to help like consult with them so they can understand like what the risks are, what ways to mitigate harm. It can just always be helpful to seek some like legal advice and counsel before engaging in any type of particularly civil disobedience. Yeah.
Thanks, y'all. I want to really harp on the fact that legal observers are really crucial. They are third parties to any sort of demonstrations, and they're there just to make sure that folks that they're documenting any sort of infringements on folks' rights. And you can also think of them as a cop watch, but they're also just making sure that if anything takes place, that there's actually documentation that can be provided in any sort of legal recourse later. Um, I want to add, we got a lot of great questions here. So the next question is, what kind of data is shared with ICE fusion centers, and what triggers that data sharing? How does that get around FERPA or other privacy rights? Very difficult. Go ahead, Clarence.
Yeah. So this gets a little tricky, and I'm going to try and keep things high level. So, in general, FERPA only protects what the statute defines as educational records. So those are records that have like person identifying information, and it's related to like something that the kid's doing in school. So think about grades, attendance records, things of that nature. FERPA exempts other types of records and what they call directory information. So this is a variety of information about a student. It can be things like their name, their address, things of that nature. For directory information, all the school district has to do is say, this is the information that we're going to classify as directory information. And once it's classified as that way and they've met the public notice requirement, they could disclose those records to third parties without having prior parental consent. So that is one of the workarounds, and that those types of information, that directory information, is oftentimes things that can be made available to law enforcement. Um, in general, though, what I have been seeing, kind of two trends I'll just kind of keep on folks' radars. One are these behavioral threat assessment teams. So I'm sure Texas, y'all are familiar with them, but these are essentially kind of teams of law enforcement folks and school folks that respond to like potential threats to the school, to individuals, or threats that folks have against themselves. And the idea in theory is that by having communication and coordination between these different entities within the community, that they can proactively be able to identify potential threats and like deal with it on the front end. But what in reality, what's happening is it's just becoming this kind of way of having unfettered access to student data. We've seen in a number of communities where law enforcement agencies have taken advantage of this and taken a bunch of sensitive records that they use to do whatever they want to do. In one instance, for example, I've seen them develop like an entire predictive policing program by taking students' data from those threat assessment teams and building out their own risk assessment based off that data. The other trend I'll also just highlight here is around like gang databases, which a number of cities have, a number of states have. And so these are like, arbitrary designations that law enforcement will give to a variety of young people. They're almost exclusively Black and brown young people. That's the case in New York, in DC and other places. But once you have that gang designation, law enforcement will like focus in particular on surveilling those folks. And so they'll oftentimes work with school-based police to try and surveil those particular young people. So those are the two big things I would kind of keep an eye out for. But because that's, these fusion centers and real-time crime centers are, in every state and in a lot of communities around the country, they're constantly adapting and finding new ways of being able to access student data, whether it's through, just like I said before, having like actual cameras that they have access to in the school district, to the social media monitoring and like sharing information between agencies about what they're seeing on social media. There's just a really vast infrastructure that allows for ICE and other law enforcement agencies to get like really sensitive information about young people.
Thank you for that, Clarence. I'm gonna ask two questions next. One is if my district superintendent put out an inadequate policy on immigration, what's the best way to get them to change the policy and put out a stronger statement? So we're thinking K through 12. Norma, do you have any thoughts on that?
Is it the last question that you just read?
It is the question about a district put out an inadequate policy on immigration already, and
Mm.
we're trying to get them to change that policy and put out a stronger statement. Mm.
Do they have the policy? Like, what does it say?
Right. So when we don't have that at the moment, I'd imagine that could be if I just threw that a coin in the fountain, it probably hit HISD. So I imagine probably HISD could have put out a statement that just isn't strong.
Okay, yeah. We they're also on the guide that I sent and that we will be sharing. It does have an example of what uh a district statement could look like if it was supportive of students regardless of immigrations and it had in mind everybody's safety. And if that's not the case, then that is why I have following that examples of what resolutions could be to start to bring to the board, so that we can change policies and have statements that support our communities.
Mhm. So we're gonna have to keep organizing, right? That's what I'm hearing. I think folks are always welcome to use Shift Press as a way to let it be known to the public that something is inadequate. Shift Press, while over 90% of our writers are under 25 and the majority of those are in high school, we allow anyone to write for Shift Press as long as they're writing about Houston Youth in Power. We platform and we pay. So if you're wanting to really make a wedge in that, you can definitely reach out to us by DMing us on social media or emailing info@shift.press. The question that's connected to that, and I'm going to skip over that question for Erica, but Erica, definitely get ready for that. The question that's connected to that is my institution, a university, sent out a guide about ICE encounters and recommended um, that we call campus police in such situations. How do I get them to change the suggestion? So, who wants to engage that? Who is interested in engaging that? Go ahead, Claudia.
Well, I would say that, of course, these things are not easy, but bringing to the attention, talking to your department, again, administration, and letting them know that calling the police may uh, perhaps do more harm, escalate a situation instead of protecting the students, like bringing that to light and asking like what can we do to help the student, always bring it back to the safety of that student, and saying that you're protecting that, the students should be the goal in organizing, getting the other faculty members, staff and faculty members on board, in voicing this concern, because you never know what will happen if you call the police, and then how are you going to ensure that that student is going to be protected? So I would take that to the administrators and ask them to explain specifically, how is this going to protect the students in my class or our students on campus?
Right. Thank you so much. Next question we have is a question for Erica. They wanted to know, how do I acknowledge what's going on without feeding into fear in the classroom? Go ahead and take that, Erica.
Okay. I have a couple of suggestions. One is to just say it, just name the fact that there's a lot of change, there's a lot of turmoil. I'm aware of it. It's in my chest too. And just say that up front so that students don't need to wonder about whether you're aware of it or whether you're going to ignore it. One of the things that my young folks that I spend a lot of time with said is that they just don't want people to act like nothing is happening, to just go on about the everyday and it's like nothing's going on. So part of it is not even being specific necessarily. It's just saying there's a lot going on and I see it and I know you see it and you feel it too. Another thing is that, yes, I see Claudia's comment. Yes, genuine care is very hard to fake. And also, like, don't try, because it will destroy trust. And that's not, it just don't try to act like you care if you don't. Another thing I would say is that we have a circle practice in my classroom. We circle every day. Before we start the lesson, I use that space to just get a read on how everybody's doing and to frame what we're going to do for the day. And I always just ask students how they're doing, and we've built that trust and they answer honestly. And if there's anything that they want to put in the circle, and let the circle hold for them while we go on about the rest of our day. And sometimes a student will say something related to this immigration issue or some other thing that they're going through. And it's in the circle. They've given it to us as a collective to hold it. And where we honor that gift. And that's a form of acknowledgement. And then another one is just really focusing on, if you're a teacher, your content probably has something to do with the state of the world. I mean, we orient ourselves in the world through education and through contents, particularly, I mean, no disrespect to math teachers out there, but the humanities teachers, I have really been saying, and this is a completely nonpartisan statement. It is very important for us to understand the facts and where the facts end and interpretation begins. It is very important for us to understand the relationship between identity and experience. All of these things are really important, and they're all ways to acknowledge what's going on without hyping what's going on and scaring people who are already scared enough.
I have that. There's a last question, and Dr. Morales, if you can go ahead and drop that PDF one more time in the chat just for this last person.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, so the question is, how can I introduce protecting students and staff at a PWI? My campus hasn't touched on this subject, and faculty members like myself are frustrated. It can be really frustrating, and I really want to thank you for asking that question and really taking this moment very seriously. Because often in certain universities that have a large PWI PWI institution, there's this assumption that this issue is not important, but actually when that happens, that ends up making it even more harmful for that demographic of students that we do know always exists at these different schools, to feel safe in their own environments. With all that being said, is in that school crisis playbook that Dr. Morales has put in the chat, that we'll also reshare tomorrow, there is some details about a school plan that can be implemented, and they're not too different than the type of things that you would want to happen at a university level, right? So consider really engaging those. I do think that you should take seriously the ask for reaching out to folks like Norma or Dr. Morales, because if they don't have the answer, they could also connect you to other folks they know across the nation who could also answer your questions specifically at the university level. But really take a look at that first, and then contact one of our speakers if you have more questions. But with all that being said, we're already over time, so I want to just thank everyone for being here. Thank you for really sticking in with this work, and showing care for your students and your other colleagues and folks that you know in education by coming through. We will share this recording and we will share some notes tomorrow. But in the meantime, stay true to your rights. Really be careful of the surveillance that's around you, and be mindful whenever there are any sort of law enforcement individuals around. But thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate you.